Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, whatever time you're listening. My name is Sam, and I'm once again joined by, well, Callum's not here, but we at very late notice. Thank you, Jamie, for stepping in from the review pod. How are you, Jamie?
Yeah, I'm all right. How are you?
Good, yeah, not too bad. And thank you again for stepping in at
No,
late
it's not.
notice. So
I feel like I'm like the podcast equivalent of like a supply teacher at school. I'm sort of like the call is that you need to cover this French lesson this month, something.
yeah. Well, we've got a packed show. We're going to aim for around the 40-minute mark. So we've got the predictions from last week. We'll go through a couple of retain lists, and then we've got the two previews of the playoff games. So we'll start off with the admin, as I call it now, as me and Callum have been having a little battle between who gets the enough points in terms of outcomes and scores. I had a 12-point lead after 2 weeks. I'm very disappointed to say that after match day 46, Callum has won. I have completely capitulated and bottled the lead, and Callum
Wow.
actually won by 2 points in the end. His correct score with Wigan versus Bristol Rovers won him the
Is
competition.
that a metaphor for Leighton Orient's playoff run as well for you, Sam?
Pretty much, yeah. We finished 12 points off the playoffs. Yeah, but I could say it for Lincoln as well. I've bottled it on the
Yes.
final day, so yeah, we can two can play at that game on that occasion. So yeah, in terms of that, Callum wins, so he gets the cream egg. So speaking of the playoffs, we've obviously got Barnsley without a manager. The bookmakers obviously went a bit heavy on Richie Wellens going there after their I can't remember the geezer's name, Thalhammer, the Austrian geezer, failed to get a work permit after it was apparently all agreed. So who is the right man, Jamie? Who do we think will get this Barnsley job?
I feel that's a question for Seb, and Seb seems he was on the Richie Wellens train on Monday. And I do remember saying that's just not going to happen, and I'm happy to have been proven right since. But I mean, I think it's difficult to look past in terms of like sort of looking in from the outside, thinking who's that available at that sort of level. Then a name like a Michael Duff, obviously been around a little bit now. Will he go back to Barnsley? I mean, I don't know really. He didn't do bad with them at all.
No.
Maybe it's one of them where it's like, why is he sort of left? Would he want to come back? Sort of that that he's already been burnt once already because he didn't do badly really under him,
No.
and obviously he's not done a great job at Swansea in between. But that's the only name that really comes to mind for me. There's lots of managers sort of linked with the Stevenage job that maybe you could see a couple of them, but people like a Gareth Ainsworth obviously not coming up to Barnsley, and two, not really at the manager that's at that level, the sort of manager that Barnsley want right now. So I think the pool really is quite small unless they look for someone like a name that we don't know. I mean, who knew Neil Collins before he came over from America, or the Austrian fellow that you mentioned, and like who sort of knows these names before they sort of get plucked out of thin air in a way. So I could see it being someone like that we sort of don't know, and then they'll just sort of appear.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. Obviously, Barnsley have a track record of just hiring managers who just come from abroad. They had, I think it was Gerhard Struber, and they had a manager that's now managing somewhere in Belgium, but I can't remember his name. They obviously have Valerian Ismail, who it was his first job, I believe, in England. So they have a habit of just hiring these managers who EFL fans have no idea. Some of them work, some of them doesn't.
Yeah.
I would say, obviously, the start of the season they had was relatively good. It is a huge risk, obviously, sacking him. They obviously feel that try and get some sort of bounce out of the players, and they obviously drew 1-1 at the weekend with Northampton conceding that last minute goal. But the playoffs is a different kettle of fish. For momentum comes into it a little bit, but for Barnsley, it's probably just kind of a free hit for them now. They just kind of rely on their own individual ability, I suppose, to try and drag them out of these situations.
Yeah, I mean, they're in such awful form, aren't they? I mean, I know it's one of those things that's like, it's always said momentum is so important. And if you look at that, see, Barnsley, there's no chance, really, if you're looking at it from that sort of perspective. But you never know that, maybe a no manager bounce rather than a new manager bounce for them. But I'm not sold on them in terms of being able to turn it around. I mean, since they last played Bolton, when Bolton scored 2 late goals to draw, they've been awful since. Me and Seb think maybe that was the sort of the kicker that has put them onto this awful run that they've ended up, rather than fighting for the automatics, just fighting to stay in the playoffs, which is obviously they did the final day. But I'm sort of skeptical that sacking the manager just before the playoffs is the right thing to do in terms of just having a solid sort of identity, or even just an idea of what you want to do. Because I mean, are they really going to be able to change much between now and the playoffs with an interim manager? I really don't think so.
No, I do agree. It's a very difficult time to just get even an interim in to try and stamp some sort of authority on the team. I think if they did get Wellens, he would have done that. He would have just said it how it is, as we know. But I, for one, am absolutely delighted. He's obviously signed a new 3-year contract. I think it's one of them where, if you go off what Orient fans are thinking, they're all obviously crapping themselves. But if you go through if you find the right people on Twitter and see their liked tweets, you kind of know things are happening in the background. I was always confident that he would stay. And what you do is you stick a tenner on Richie Wellens, next Barnsley manager, and straight to the top of the odds he goes.
Yeah, so well, that's the thing, isn't it? It's so it fluctuates so much, doesn't it? Between that, people just come out of nowhere in these sort of odds. And you look when. I mean, on this season, when there was 2 or 3 jobs going at the same time, every manager, all the free lists are all the same sort of thing. It's like, at least for certain parts, you don't really know who it's going to be, and it's always a bit of a surprise sometimes by the end anyway.
Yeah, 100%. So we've got a couple of retain lists to go through. There's a couple of names I was quite surprised that were released, but we're not going to do any of the promoted teams. So Portsmouth and Derby don't exist anymore. Nor do the relegated teams. They're not part of League One anymore. So Bristol Rovers, the 2 names I picked out were Sam Finley and John Marquis. I suspect John Marquis will probably end up somewhere like Doncaster. Obviously playing.
Well, I mean, we can hope. We can hope, Sam. We really can. I mean, we got fairly good memories, overall happy memories of John Marquis. He was, before this season, at Joe Ironside, he was the last person we had that scored 20 goals in a season. So that was 5 years ago. But I don't know if he'll come back. I could see him going for just one of the promoted teams in general. I know Mansfield, they've been linked with Johnson Clark Harris, haven't they? But in that same sort of vein, maybe a John Marquis is that similar sort of an experienced name. But yeah, maybe a Cambridge, someone who's just sort of a team that's just stayed up in the division, or a team that's coming into the division. That's the sort of the place I see John Marquis going.
Yeah. Speaking of Cambridge, they let go experienced defender Ryan Bennett, club legend Harrison Dunk, experienced forward Lyle Taylor, and Fajiri Okunabiri. Lyle Taylor doesn't surprise me.
Not experienced, Fajiri. You said free experience and then Okunabiri.
Yeah. Lyle Taylor obviously doesn't surprise me with the falling out of the fans over the past couple of weeks. Harrison Dunk, I don't think it's a surprising one. I think Gary Monk's gone in there and tried to shake things up after the last couple of years, obviously underperforming. Ryan Bennett, that again doesn't surprise me. The only thing Ryan Bennett has done all season, it was that mazy run where I think he actually ended up scoring when nobody decided to tackle him, because it's like, hey, he's not going to score. It's Ryan Bennett. Exeter City, they released Harry Kite.
I think on the Cambridge ones, it seems to be like he's trying to get rid of like the old guard in a way. I know Okunabiri doesn't fit into that, but the other 3 is sort of trying to get rid of the old guard going on, trying to maybe move towards a bit more youth. I mean, I'll tell you, imagine he'll sort of show up at another League One team. Okunabiri, maybe a drop down to League Two for him, but there's plenty of teams will sort of line up for those experienced sort of names, like maybe like a Burton, a team like that, or sort of pick up someone like a Ryan Bennett or a Harrison Dunk, someone who's been around a bit.
Could you imagine Ryan Bennett actually goes to Mansfield? They'd have a back line of Ryan Bennett and Aidan Flint. They're just going to be set piece FC.
It doesn't scream pace. Stick a striker with a bit of pace at Alfie May running at them, and it's over.
They're going to be defending on their 6-yard box next season. Exeter City released Harry Kite and Alex Hartridge. Leyton Orient released Rob Hunt and Adam Thompson. The surprising one for me was actually Rob Hunt getting released. He's been under Wellens at 3 different clubs. Wellens mentioned that it's obviously difficult for them to have. They chose between Tom James and Rob Hunt, and they chose Tom James just because of his versatility. They didn't want 2 similar players because they want a more athletic fullback, which to me is absolutely fine. Adam Thompson, model professional, and hopefully he'll find a club where he can actually get some football and play well. Lincoln City, I picked 3 names out. In Danny Mandrieu was a surprising one.
Yeah, well, they've released the other two. I'm assuming you're going to say obviously they've released TJ Ioma, which I guess was a bit more of a surprise, but he's not really played since February. And Hakeem Adelican, which everyone knew he was going anyway. They sort of said that in January when he was loaned out to Doncaster that was him done really with the club. Mandreu was in talks. He's not been officially released. He's in talks. Obviously, Ted Bishop and Lewis Montsma also. So they're the 3 that it's in the air. I mean, Lars Sorensen, I think, was the important one in terms of they've added, they've triggered the extension in his contract. Whereas Mandreu, I think it was interesting that they haven't triggered an extension, I beg your pardon, like they have done with Lars Sorensen. So there's this talk there, and as well, obviously, with Ted Bishop and a very injured Lewis Montsma. So it's been interesting to see sort of what happens there. I mean, I'm assuming League One clubs will sort of be looking at all 3 of them really if they do end up getting released. TJ Ilmers, I think he's a really solid League One centre half. So I think he could end up somewhere. And Adelican, I think the whole idea is he's going to end up going to Doncaster in the summer. But I think we have to get promoted for that to happen. So, but yeah, an interesting one. I think
very likely. I think I can't remember. I think I put McDonald's to actually win them playoffs against Donny in the final.
Wow.
So. But that's just based on, I think. I don't really know why I did it. I just think MK Dons have that little bit more quality.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they finished 3rd. We finished 5th. So, I mean, 4th. Sorry, they finished. So on paper, I bet there was about 7 or 8 points in front of us.
Northampton Town released Liam Moore, who signed, I think it was in February. Experienced striker Danny Hilton and left back Ryan Haynes. Shrewsbury Town, experienced striker Ryan Bowman, Aidan O'Brien, who spent most of the season at Sutton, centre half Tom Flanagan, and midfielder Tom Bayliss was the surprising one for me. I only remember Tom Bayliss mainly from Football Manager because he always leaves Shrewsbury to a Championship club at the start of the season. I don't know the reasons behind that. Maybe he thinks he could do a better club. I'd love personally Tom Bayliss to come to us.
I think this is the thing with some of these, like the reasons behind people getting released are so varied, aren't they? I mean, like even look at Lincoln City. In like Adelican's been released because they've been trying to move him out of the club for a couple of years. TJ Omer maybe is one of those where he's too good to be sat on the bench, and maybe that's what you sort of say with Tom Bayliss in terms that he's like a Regan Paul they had with Lincoln last season, where he left to go to Portsmouth rather than being sold. He was released, and that's where he ended up. So I think it's one to keep an eye on. And I mean, my only other one from the ones you picked out was just remembering that Danny Hilton played for Northampton, which was a surprise to me. It seemed to really pass me by that one. It was a blast from the past, Danny Hilton.
Very much so. And then Wickham, Max, I can't even say his name. I'm just going to call him Max, the goalkeeper.
Strujic, is it Strujic?
Yeah, Max, who's on loan at Crewe. He's obviously got more important matters on his mind with this week's playoff fixture. Club legend Joe Jacobson, after he made his 400th appearance at the weekend. And the surprising one for me, I know he's got a problem with injury records, but is Kane Vincent Young.
He's a good player, isn't he? It was an interesting one that that's the sort of player they're looking to get out. I mean, Jacobson, it was nice that they gave him the 400th game, wasn't it? I mean, I saw a little bit of talk about that beforehand, that he was on 399, and it would be nice to get him obviously to that milestone. But yeah, it seemed like it was coming, that one.
Yeah. And obviously Wickham ended the season rather well, finishing in 10th place. So we're going to move on to our first preview game. Just a little statistic on the 4 playoff games. These 4 teams in the playoffs actually were the highest scorers in the league, which is quite surprising. So this means all the playoff games are going to be really low scoring and really boring.
Yeah, they'll all be 0-0.
So we'll get underway with Barnsley versus Bolton. So I've written down a load of stuff.
I feel really inadequate. Reading all these stats you've got and everything. I look at the prep I do for a Monday and I think I've not got all these stats put on my ears, but no, some really some good stats we've got coming here.
Different styles, I say. I'm more of a statistician than a talker. So we've got
which is great Barnsley for a podcast.
So Barnsley versus Bolton. So Barnsley have come into the game with 2 wins in 12, and they scraped in on the final day because Blackpool. Even if Blackpool would have won, they would have got in, but they completely capitulated to Reading. Their bad away form finally caught up, and then Lincoln I'd say were unfortunate in defeat to Pompey with the missed penalty. That kind of shifted the game, I think.
It was one of those. I think they looked really, really nervous in the first half, in particular. They didn't play well. They didn't play badly, but they just didn't really create anything. It looked very nervy. And then second half, you mentioned the missed penalty. They were really good for a spell leading up to that missed penalty, and that seemed to really sort of knock the stuffing out of them a little bit. And then by the time they sort of recovered, Pompey had got them on the counter attack because they were just throwing bodies forward. So a bit of an unfortunate afternoon in the end for them, really.
Bolton come into the playoffs on good form. In the same period of 12 games, they have only lost one game, and that was the crucial game at the top when they lost to Derby. Both meetings this season have ended in draws, with 6 of the last 14 meetings between the sides actually ending in a draw. And it's actually a rerun of last year's playoff semi-final, where Barnsley came out on top. I remember watching that one in a place in Ipswich and just looking up and then, because I had a bet on Bolton to go up through that whole season, and then they capitulated at the sort of the end. So they'll be looking to rewrite that history and actually get over the hurdle at this time. So in terms of Barnsley, they've conceded 2 or more in 5 of their last 6 games. They do have, so obviously they've got a player, Adam Phillips is the player that I rate really highly in Barnsley. I think they've got a really strong midfield. You've got Connell, you've got Phillips, and you've got Herbie Kane, which is arguably one of the best 3 in the league.
That could be in the Championship midfield, really, couldn't it? Sort of like on paper. Herbie Kane's someone that we had on loan a couple of years ago. I mean, and Connell, and Phillips. I mean, Phillips has won he's won 1 or 2 Player of the Months this year, hasn't he? I mean, all 3 of them have been fantastic. I mean, they've sort of, in a way, Devante Cole obviously is still been up there in terms of the Golden Boot race. And he did win it in the end, didn't he? Or did he finish 3rd? I think he was up there, wasn't he, with Alfie May
got it, yeah.
Bishop, yeah. But he's not really scored recently. He's sort of, rather reading the things, that he sort of dropped off a bit. So it'd be interesting to see if they can sort of pick him back up and sort of pick up a bit of momentum outside of that solid midfield.
Yeah, 100%. They've obviously got the worst defensive record in the top half, which doesn't actually surprise me because I've banged on all season about expected points and stuff like that. And it turns out Barnsley didn't actually end the season with the biggest overachiever in terms of expected points. They finished 2nd. It was actually Portsmouth based on expected points, who should have come 3rd based on metrics. But I think we can all agree that they were actually the best team over the course of the season anyway.
Yeah.
In terms of Barnsley home form, they're actually mid-table in terms of their home form with 9 wins, 7 draws and 7 losses, while their away form, which will obviously be the reverse leg, is the 3rd best with 12 wins, 6 draws and 5 losses. For Bolton Wanderers, they're the 2nd best attack in the league with 86 goals. Their top scorer has 14, which is Dion Charles, who's actually underperforming his expected goals, which is quite surprising, actually.
They're a team that, I mean, obviously you'll get onto it when you sort of talk about the rest of them, but they create a lot of chances, don't they? Which probably that points to why he's underachieving a little bit, because they create a lot, and they've got, I mean, the 2 of them up front, Charles and Collins. I mean, the goals they score combined, it's no wonder why they've done so well, really, with them sort of spearheading it.
Yeah, that's right. I suppose when you've got a budget where you go out and sign people like Collins in January, you've got to be in the top of the league, because he's one of them players, Collins, who could easily play at a higher level.
Yeah, they've got a lot of them in that team, haven't they? They've got a very good team, and it's one of those teams that just needs to go up in a way. That they've put a lot of money into it. I mean, obviously not the only ones, but they've put a lot of money into that team, and maybe they do need to get that promotion to sort of just make it all worthwhile.
I don't know if you know this. I got told this last week. I think Callum mentioned it. Ian Evatt actually owns a percentage of Bolton.
Oh, right. No, I didn't know that. No.
Yeah, a fun random fact of the day. Yeah, he owns like 2 or 3% of the company that own Bolton. So he's effectively, if he leaves, he's sacking himself.
Has he got enough of a stake to stop himself getting sacked if they don't go up?
Who knows? He's obviously mentioned a couple of times that he's tired and stuff like that. So I think he might actually leave, regardless of if they don't go up. I think he'll leave.
I mean, I just had a quick look there. 223 games at Bolton.
It's got to be the longest 51%
win rate. Yeah, July 2020 he joined. I mean, what's that? Closing on 4 years, isn't it? So
got to be the longest serving manager in the EFL nearly now, isn't he? Because obviously
yeah,
Coleman left
it's not
Accrington.
difficult, is it? Really, at the minute, they sort of if you last longer than a couple of years, you've done well.
Revolving door nowadays, isn't it?
Hmm.
So that Bolton have the best defence in the playoffs, but all teams in the playoffs have conceded more goals than Lincoln, Blackpool, and Stevenage, and Peterborough, Oxford, and Barnsley have actually conceded more goals than Wickham and Leyton Orient as well. So we do expect goals in these playoff games.
There he goes, gone and jinxed it.
Yeah, I've gone to jinx it. Obviously, this being the Friday night game, I'm quite looking forward to getting home from work and watching this game because I personally think this is the pick of the playoff games. And I'll get on to why I think that in a bit. And then the three players I've picked out from Bolton. The defender is Ricardo Santos, which is their captain. They seem to just play better when he actually plays. Sheehan in midfield has got their top assists. And then I've picked Collins up front just purely because I think he can do a bit of everything. You've got Tian Charles for the physicalness, and then Collins can just do a bit of everything and play off him as the sort of second striker.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I've said a couple of times, they just have a really strong team. I don't know how you can sort of say that in more words, maybe to sort of elongate what I'm trying to say, but they're a really solid team. Yeah. They're very easily. Really, maybe you'd say they should have got automatics really with sort of the squad they had, but I mean, Derby were very good throughout, and Portsmouth, obviously, like you mentioned yourself, that they've just been so much better than anybody really in the division. And yeah, it's just be interesting to see how they sort of cope with it because it's big pressure, obviously, and they didn't, like you mentioned, that they came out on the wrong side against Barnsley last season. So that will be in, as much as you sort of say about focusing on one game, that will be in the back of your mind, won't it? Trying to think you don't want to repeat the same feat the second year in a row. No. But I mean, I don't know. Have you got a prediction? Do you do? Can I join in on your prediction?
Yeah,
Lee?
feel free. Feel free. Yeah, you could. If you, I'll get what I'll do. I'll give you. It'll be triple points week, and if you get the correct score, you go straight to the top.
I'll beat Callum. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of, I fancy Bolton here out of these two. I mean, I think it does come down to momentum more than. I mean, probably is as much as it is said, because it is said a lot, isn't it? That momentum is very important. But I do think in this sort of instance, it is in that they've been so poor and they didn't really pick up without Neil Collins at the weekend. Because I mean, they drew, didn't they? And they were winning for a while, but obviously got pegged back. And they're just not in a good place, really. They're not in the place of a team that looks like they've got any real chance to get into the championship. And Bolton, I think, will just have a bit too much for them over the two legs.
What is your total aggregate score?
Oh God, aggregate score.
Yeah, we'll go aggregate score.
You're predicting goals, aren't you? I might go for I'll go for a 4-2.
4-2 to Bolton. So. Okay, so yeah, because I think if we did two separate scores, that could be yeah, it'd be a nightmare. So we'll just go total aggregate score, and I'm actually going to go for 6-3 Bolton.
Ooh, man.
Goals. Especially, I think when Bolton are at home, I think there'll be goals.
Yeah. I think the thing is, if Bolton can get an early lead, then they're really going to have to sort of go for it. Barnsley, and that might open them up slightly. But I think it's an interesting game. I mean, they're both fine. Obviously, we'll get to the other one, won't we? But I think it has. It's got all the hallmarks of a really good playoff. A couple of legs, that one.
Yeah. So what we do, we'll quickly go to our break, and then we'll discuss Oxford versus Peterborough. Okay, welcome back to the second half. So Oxford United versus Peterborough. Some people probably say this is actually the pick of the games. But I think this is going to sound really weird, but I think this might be a pretty convincing playoff tie for Peterborough. Mainly because Oxford have won one game against the top 9. And that, funnily enough, was against Peterborough when they won 5-0. But I'm pretty sure that was the week after Peterborough just won the EFL trophy.
Yeah, it was.
Then played a league game a couple of days later and won. And then just, obviously, they were just completely obliterated and got... So I just don't know. I think Oxford are still very inconsistent. They beat the teams they should beat, which is why they're in the position they are. But they don't seem to be competitive against the teams that, when it really matters, there are big games.
No, I'd agree with that. I feel like I've sort of accidentally become like a Des Buckingham, like a source of Des Buckingham hate on the Monday Night podcast because I seem to bring up. I mean, it's not true anymore, but for a long time they hadn't won back-to-back games under him, and they won a couple, didn't they? I think they went on a really good one where they won sort of 4-0, 4-0, 5-0, including that Peterborough game. That's what ended that run, but. overall they are really inconsistent. I mean, since then, what did they lost to Lincoln quite narrowly at home, drew to Stevenage when they needed a result, and they've only really got into playoffs because Lincoln slipped up on the final day, because they, after that draw at Stevenage, they were back relying on Lincoln to slip up. So they're really not in a good place, I don't think. They're one of those teams where they always seem at the minute anyway just to be missing something, and I think it's hard to sort of pinpoint what that is, because they were so good under Liam Manning, and maybe just overachieving, because they've really sort of fell slowly off, a bit like Barnsley, but over a longer period that they've sort of fell away from those automatic places. But yeah, I'll keep my powder dry in terms of predictions. But yeah, I wouldn't be too optimistic for Oxford.
Yeah, so Oxford, obviously, as you mentioned, have come into the playoffs with 3 wins in their last 5. Striker Mark Harris is in form with 6 goals in his last 6 games, obviously scoring a really nice finish, actually, against Exeter last week. Peterborough have actually won at Wembley, as we know, in that whatever trophy it's called nowadays. But for clubs like Peterborough, I always say a trophy is a trophy. It doesn't matter what you win.
Well, exactly.
Unless it's like the Audi Cup or something like that, as they call it in pre-season. It is a.
I think the thing that might be worth mentioning there is that, I mean, I've not had this fact checked, but I'm assuming it's true. In that, because we listened to a bit of the game you mentioned, the Papa John's or the Bristol Street Motors, whatever it is now, the cup final. It was said that they've never lost at Wembley.
Okay.
So I don't know how many games they've played at Wembley. It could be 2, but you get what I mean. So that was on Talk Sport, so I'm assuming that is obviously correct.
I hope so.
But I've said it now, so yeah, I thought it was quite interesting. But they have to get there, and Oxford, as much as I think they'll have too much for them overall, they could spring a surprise like they did against them in the league not too long ago.
You imagine if Oxford go and win 5-0, we might have a Peterborough comeback of what happened to them last year, Sheffield Wednesday-esque, so they'll obviously be looking to counteract that this year and not have that happen
sort
again.
of on that, so that seems you bring that up. That I think the opposite thing to what I was saying about Bolton having those thoughts in terms of losing to Barnsley, that they lost a lot of players from that team, didn't they? They've had a little bit of a rebuild really this season, and maybe those ideas of the thinking of, if it starts going wrong, we can't do it again, maybe that won't be as strong, in that they've had a bit of a refresh and they feel a very different team. But I feel it still could be there if they take a lead and then start getting pegged back over the 2 legs, then maybe the worries will seep back in again.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, because they've got the lowest average age in the squad, Peterborough, with just 23.9. And Johnson Clark Harris probably ups that quite a lot, because he's now 30.
And he's going as well, isn't he? Obviously.
Going as well, because they've got that new, and they obviously lose Mason Clark next year as well to Coventry.
Yeah.
So he's want to go out in style. So it will be interesting. Posh. So we'll go with Posh's stats first. Their home form is the 5th best, 13 wins, 5 draws, and 5 losses, and the home top scorers with 55. And their away record is the 4th best. But funnily enough, their goal difference is only +1 away from home, scoring 34 and conceding 33. 12 wins, 4 draws, and 7 losses. They've had 15 different goal scorers this year, with Mason Clark being the top with 14. We've mentioned that obviously that they're going to want to not what happened to Sheffield Wednesday last year. Being away first, it probably might suit them a little bit better.
Yeah.
I know their fans on the final day against Bolton, where they drew 3-3, their fans were pretty pissed off with them at half-time, being 3-0 down, and then put a really good performance on in the second half. But as we know, Peterborough can score at will. They can create chances. They've got so much pace in the final third. And I've gone for Johnson Clark Harris to start over Mothersill this weekend, regardless if he got 2 goals. I just think the physical threat and that little bit of experience is going to be needed in their team. And obviously, we know
it's interesting to see if they go that in that direction, don't they? Sort of revert back to that sort of system with Clark Harris, because he really sort of changes the way they play. I mean, a mate of mine is a Peterborough fan. They sort of the way he talks about how when Clark Harris comes on, that they, rather than being just all about the pace, it becomes that they've got a target man to aim at. So I think that's interesting to see if they go in that direction. Because they've got a plan B. I think that's what's so helpful for them has been all season, that if it's not going right, they can chuck a Clark Harris on, and he's scored a lot of goals in not much time, really, in terms of the substitute appearances he's had, and they can play a different style of football that is difficult to contain.
Yeah, only Jay Jones in their squad has a better expected goal per 90 minutes than Johnson Clark Harris. And they finished the league top scorers with 89, which isn't the most surprising statistic of the day.
No.
For Oxford, they're 8th best home form with 11 wins, 7 draws, and 5 losses. They're the 3rd top scorers actually at home. In their last 13 games, they have lost 4 of them, but only one wasn't by a single goal. So when they're losing, they're not actually losing that heavily either.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. I didn't. There's the sort of things you don't really pick up, do you, until
No.
it's sort of pointed out in that when they're losing, they're not losing heavily, which is obviously helpful over 2 legs, isn't it? As long as these are always the thing that if you're 1-0 down or like losing by 1 goal after the first leg, you're still very much in that game,
Yeah.
aren't you? Even 2, you can sort of argue that you've still got a very good chance. So I think there's like if they can sort of keep it down, because obviously when you said Peterborough at home first, didn't you? In that's really important. No, you didn't, did you? No, you said I've
Oxford
got
are
that
at
the way
home
around.
first.
And so that deletes that point I was going to make. But if they can sort of keep in it at the very least, then who knows what they can do in the second leg.
Yeah, so the key players I've picked out for Oxford, you've got Kieran Brown, who's played the most minutes for them this season. Ruben Rodriguez, as we know, his quality is undeniable on his day. He's one of the best players to
He's had a
watch
great
in
season,
this
hasn't
league.
he?
Obviously, I think the Liam Manning leaving affected him a little bit, but he seems to be finding his feet again. And then obviously Cameron Brannigan, who every single summer is touted to leave for a championship club, never happens, and he's arguably the best penalty taker in the league as well.
Yeah. How that man's never got a move to like Bristol. I always imagine him like a Bristol City move.
Yeah.
That's the sort of person they pick up. But he's fantastic, isn't he? He's very easily one of the best midfielders in the league. I know he's sort of one of those that gets included in the teams of the season, sort of every season at the minute. But Rodriguez as well, you bring up. I mean, obviously he's good, and we all know he's good, and how well he did last season at Notts County. But to come up 2 divisions, I think is quite impressive, and how he's just hit the ground running and done so well in his first season in League One is really a credit to him.
Yeah, I looked at the Oxford team from their previous game, and I think they named one midfielder, which was Brannigan. They literally just played 4 attacking midfielders. They played Tyler Goodrum in centre midfield, who they got from. No, he's there from their youth academy. I get mixed up between the Will Goodwin. But I've always thought Goodrum is an attacking midfielder. You're playing Rodriguez, you're playing Martin, you're playing. There's another right winger as well who I can't remember, but they can be open and expansive. Peterborough can be open and expansive.
Yeah.
I don't think the best way to play against Peterborough is obviously press them, because they'll just launch the ball over the top and let their wingers run. I think the best way to beat Peterborough is actually you sit on your 6-yard box and you just counter-attack, because being a young squad, they can be a little bit naive in terms of they keep moving up the pitch, and then they get caught. The experience could play a factor for Oxford. Obviously, Joe Bennett has experienced promotions before. Jamie Cummings been at this level before with MK Dons. Cameron Brannigan's obviously an experienced head. So it's experience versus youth, I think, near enough.
Interesting way of sort of phrasing it. I mean, I think that first leg can be quite important in that one, how that game sort of goes in terms of how it's framed for the second leg, because they're both free scoring teams. I mean, you mentioned it, how all 4 teams in the playoffs have scored a lot of goals, but these 2 in particular, you look at Peterborough and how they can just score goal after goal, and that stretch that I mentioned earlier, Oxford, with winning 4-0, 4-0, 5-0, that little patch where they really show that they've got that goal scoring power when they need it, and when they're sort of able to. And I think Peterborough, maybe they'll play into that a little bit if they do go for that really aggressive, fast-paced style, that it could just be, to use like the old cliche, like a basketball game. It'll sort of ping back one way or the other. So I think it's got really good potential to be an interesting one, but it just depends how they're set up tactically. Whereas the other game you mentioned, I feel that's just be a good game regardless. But I feel like the tactics will play a really important part of, if it is great on the eye, but it should be an interesting one nevertheless.
I think we've got to remember that this will be Des Buckingham's first playoff campaign, and Darren Ferguson is it's a bit of 2 sides of the spectrum as well. You've got an experienced manager in the dugout for Peterborough with a very young squad, and you've got a very young manager, an experienced manager in the Oxford dugout with a bit more of an experienced squad. So it will be quite interesting
Yeah,
to see
I think Des
how he
Bugden's one of
lines
them.
up.
He's not got EFL experience, obviously, but
No.
he's been around, hasn't he? In terms
Yeah.
of he started coaching very young, and he went like into the City group, obviously with Mumbai, and he did a lot over in New Zealand and stuff like that. And he's gone a very different route and sort of picked up experience in a different way. But in terms of EFL experience and playoff experience, then yeah, I agree that obviously Darren Ferguson's miles ahead in that department.
This is when Sir Alex Ferguson just comes down from the Peterborough little hub upstairs, the boxes, just
With the
comes
little
down on the
flat cap
touchline,
on.
just helps his son out. The two games actually this season, obviously we mentioned Oxford won 5-0 at home to Peterborough. Peterborough won 3-0 at home as well. So there's been 8 goals between them in the 2 games they've had this season. So hopefully we'll get more of the same. So for not the final time this season, because we've got the playoff final. What is the aggregate score for this game?
Well, you go first this time. I went first last time, didn't
I will go with 5-2 Peterborough over 2 legs. It is quite a tricky one, this one.
I was also sort of swinging towards a 5-2. I'll have to change that, I think, then. I might go for what you went in the first, just add an extra couple and go for 6-3 to Peterborough. I think that screams goals, doesn't it? I mean, it all depends on that first leg, I think. If that first leg's busy, lots of goals, then it could be more than that.
Yeah, I think the first leg, I'm expecting it to be a little bit more cagey. The second leg, when Peterborough are at home, I expect them to come out flying, to be honest, because that's how they play at home.
Cagey for these two is still like 1-1, 2-2 sort of thing.
This is true.
Yeah, I mean, that's the
I'm
thing.
hoping. And then,
one.
So if we actually get what the final we've
I'll
asked
change
for,
it to 5-3. Why have we gone for 6-3? 5-3, because that's ridiculous, isn't it? Really? What should be 6-3 now? I've done that.
Yeah. If we get the playoff final that we've gone for, then Peterborough versus Bolton.
We've both got the same one, haven't we? Yeah.
It could arguably be one of the best League One playoff finals we've seen on paper, in terms of not just only quality, but in terms of goal scoring. If that is the final, who would you put to go up?
It's really difficult, isn't it? I sort of think with a Peterborough, in terms of as much as I would like really fancy them for the playoffs, in that they're going to struggle if they go up. In that they're losing Johnson Clark Harris, obviously they're losing Mason Clark to Coventry, isn't it? He's gone, and they're sort of losing key players in that team on their way up, which is it's a weird situation to be in. I sort of maybe feel that Bolton need that promotion more. But I don't know if that makes them more desperate or that or free them up to be maybe a little bit more attacking for it. But I think I'm going to go for Bolton. I think I'm going to swing to Bolton and go. It's got to be a close game, as in the final. I reckon maybe a 2-1. But yeah, Bolton. It's a real toss up, that. It's because I've not really thought about it too much but that's the ones I had going to the final for like the last couple of weeks, if they were sort of like in my head. But yeah, I think it's a real toss up, isn't it? But that's great, isn't it? It's a very interesting sort of playoff set we've got.
Yeah, I think we've got a very mixed. We've got 2 teams that in Oxford and Barnsley where you think, you just look at them and you're like, you're not the best. Like if a Lincoln was in there, let's say you had Lincoln, Peterborough in there, you think, right, okay, Lincoln, as we know, were pretty free scoring the past 3 or 4 months. It might be a bit more difficult, I think, to judge, but I just think this is when we're both wrong and we actually end up with an Oxford-Barnsley final, isn't it?
This is the thing I was about to say, actually. It sort of set me up nicely in that being, as much as I've obviously not predicted that, and neither of us have, I would not be shocked. It's sort of thing. It's one of those where, like, if any of these 4 teams go up, I'm not going to go, well, that's the most unbelievable surprise in playoff football, because it's just not. I mean, those 4 teams, they're all good enough to go up. They're so not evenly matched, but similar in how they sort of match up in terms of the stats and the goal scoring. So I think it's a really interesting set of games, and I'm really looking forward to it, actually. More so than the League Two player. So I'm just really scared for. I'm just really scared, but they're really exciting games. All 5, I guess, of them.
Yeah. I think this is, if you want to get out of League One, you've got to do it this year, because next year you've obviously got Mansfield.
It's a horrible league, isn't it?
So realistically, you've obviously got Rotherham coming down, and they're managed by Big Steve, so they're going to be good.
Yes.
It's going to be Huddersfield unless they
Huddersfield, yeah.
win 17-0 at Ipswich, which is never going to happen. So we've got Huddersfield. Obviously, they were in the Premier League 3-4 years ago. So
Yeah.
yeah, brilliant. And then who knows who it could be? Birmingham, it could be Plymouth. I don't
I think
particularly
you're
want
looking at
Plymouth.
Birmingham, aren't you? You don't want the
Yeah,
trip, do you? That's the. I think maybe because Birmingham are playing. Is it Southampton? They're playing. They're playing someone quite
Southampton
high
have got
up, I think.
Leeds.
Oh, is it?
Somebody
No,
has
it's
West
Norwich.
Brom.
It's Norwich, isn't it?
Yeah,
Maybe it is West Brom. They're playing someone up and about. I mean, I'm not sort of like fully in on my championship who's playing who sort of thing,
no,
but I know they're playing a team who have got something to sort of fight for in the way going forward. But yeah, if that's the three that come down, it's stacked, isn't it, as a division?
yeah.
Yeah, they're playing Norwich. They are.
They're
But yeah, and
expected
coming up,
rules.
Mansfield have had a good season. Wrexham, obviously, we know with the money they've sort of got to flaunt around, and they can add to that team, which is already really a League One team. It's sort of been since they were in the National League. And then Stockport, who obviously they've been the best team in League Two by a decent way. They're a very dangerous team. And then obviously Doncaster. I mean, they're the biggest threat in terms of the teams that are coming up. So
Not confident
yeah,
going
no,
into the playoffs.
I know we'll see, but I get what you mean. I think this is the only thing. I mean, not to go on too much of a tangent. When I sort of look at who we're going to face if we go promoted, I struggle to see victories out of the teams
Yeah.
that we'll end up playing because it's an unbelievably stacked league next season, regardless of who leaves it and who comes in it. It's going to be interesting, really, and yeah, hopefully the playoffs lives up to the hype we've given it over the past 40 minutes.
Yeah, because let's say we'll finish on this. I think personally, I don't know if you agree with this. If Bolton were to go up, I think you obviously based on the table, you've had the three best teams go up. I
Yeah.
don't think we will have a team next year that scores over 90 points. I think we're going to have everyone a little bit tighter because I think Rotherham have got a huge rebuild. So personally, I think they'll start quite slowly. Birmingham, while they come down, they are possibly one of the most dismal clubs to support in the country at the moment, just purely because they don't have success.
Yeah.
And then say Huddersfield come down, they're exactly the same. After that playoff final, which arguably was extremely controversial, they've been pretty just near the bottom. So they've not really had much success and again need another rebuild. So I just don't think there will be a standout team next year because obviously, like you mentioned, Peterborough are going to lose arguably two of their better players. And there's going to be people after Kiprianu, people after Ronnie Edwards, Harrison Burrows.
Oh, yeah. If they don't go up, definitely.
So I'm hoping,
Yeah, no,
which we'll
I
cover
think that's
in
interesting. That,
and we'll cover in our probably season preview in a couple of months' time what we think. So thank you, Jamie, for joining me on today's preview.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And we hope you have a lovely weekend, and we'll hopefully see you all in next week.